The first gunshot silenced every patron in the dusty saloon, but it was the second that sent Penelope Hart diving behind an overturned table, her heart hammering against her corset as the scent of gunpowder and cheap whiskey filled her nostrils. This wasn't how she'd imagined her first day in Crowsbeak, Arizona territory, crouched beneath splintered wood while bullets flew overhead and men shouted obscenities that would make even her late father's ranch hands blush. "Get down, miss." A rough voice commanded as a strong hand pressed against her shoulder, pushing her lower to the floor. "These men ain't playing games." Penelope nodded, too frightened to speak as she peered up at her rescuer, a young cowhand with kind eyes and trembling hands. "It's him again," the boy whispered, his voice cracking. "Zachary Blackwood." The name seemed to chill the very air around them. Outside, the sounds of conflict continued, boots scraping against wooden planks, the crack of another shot, a man's pained cry. Then silence fell, heavy and ominous. Penelope gathered her courage. "Who is Zachary Blackwood?" The young man's face paled. "The devil himself, madam, and you don't ever want to cross his path." It was September 1878, and Penelope Hart had just arrived in Crowsbeak with nothing but $20 to her name, a small trunk of belongings, and her father's pocket watch. At 22, she had buried both parents within 6 months of each other, her mother to consumption, her father to a broken heart, and watched as creditors stripped away the family ranch in Nebraska. With no relatives and few options, she had answered an advertisement in the newspaper seeking teachers for frontier towns. Now, as she huddled on the dirty floor of Crowsbeak's only saloon, which also functioned as the stagecoach stop, Penelope wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The saloon doors swung open. Boots thumped across the threshold, slow, deliberate steps that seemed to count out the heartbeats of every person in the room. No one moved. No one spoke. "Dempsey," a deep voice called out, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." From her hiding place, Penelope could only see the lower half of the man, worn leather boots covered in trail dust, faded denim trousers, and gunbelts crossed at narrow hips. A long black duster swayed with each step. "I swear, Blackwood, I didn't know it was your cattle." A man's panicked voice responded from across the room. "I'll pay you double what I got for him. It ain't about the money." The voice was calm, terrifyingly so. "It's the principle." Another shot rang out, followed by the crash of breaking glass. Someone screamed. Penelope flinched, squeezing her eyes shut. "Next one goes between your eyes," the man Blackwood said. "You have until sundown tomorrow to return what's mine, plus interest. Otherwise, I'll be back, and I won't be nearly as pleasant." The boots turned, heading for the door. As they passed Penelope's hiding place, they paused. She held her breath. "Madam," the voice said, softer now, "you might want to find a safer place to wait for whatever it is you're waiting for." Penelope looked up, startled, into the most striking face she had ever seen. Zachary Blackwood couldn't have been more than 30, with features that might have belonged on a classical statue, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes the color of a summer storm. A wide-brimmed black hat cast shadows across his face, but couldn't hide the thin white scar that ran from his right temple to the corner of his mouth. What struck her most, however, was not his handsomeness, but the absolute emptiness in his gaze. He looked at her with the detached interest one might show a curious insect. "Welcome to Crowsbeak," he said, tipping his hat slightly before continuing toward the door. The saloon remained silent for a full minute after he left. Then, like a dam breaking, everyone began talking at once. The young cowhand who had sheltered with her helped Penelope to her feet. "You all right, miss?" "Yes, thank you," she said, brushing dust from her traveling skirt. "Who exactly was that man?" that there was Zachary Blackwood, owns the biggest spread north of town, the Broken Spur. Mean as a rattler and twice as quick to strike. The young man glanced nervously at the door. Folks around here give him a wide berth if they've got any sense. The barkeeper approached, a sympathetic look on his weathered face. You must be the new schoolteacher. Sheriff was supposed to meet you, but he got called out to the Morrison place. Horse theft. He extended a hand. Name's Harold Walsh. I own this establishment. Penelope Hart, she replied, taking his hand. And yes, I'm the new teacher. Well, Miss Hart, not the warmest welcome, I'm afraid. Let me get you something to calm your nerves before I show you to the boarding house. As Penelope sipped a glass of water, refusing anything stronger despite her shaking hands, Walsh filled her in on the infamous Zachary Blackwood. Came to these parts about 5 years ago. Nobody knows where from. Bought the old Dutton place after old man Dutton died, renamed it the Broken Spur. Keeps to himself mostly, but cross him and God help you. Walsh polished a glass as he spoke. Strange fellow, too. Never takes off that black duster, not even in the height of summer. Some say he's hiding something. Others say he's running from something. Or someone, added a man at the bar. Whatever his story, he's dangerous, Walsh continued. But fair in his own way, never kills without warning, never takes more than what's owed. That's supposed to be reassuring. Penelope asked, setting down her empty glass. Walsh shrugged. This is the frontier, Miss Hart. Standards are different here. The boarding house run by Mrs. Violet Murphy turned out to be a tidy 2-story building with white curtains in the windows and a small garden out front, an oasis of civilization in the dusty Main Street. The widow Murphy herself was a plump woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner that Penelope found comforting after the chaos of her arrival. Rules are simple, Mrs. Murphy explained as she showed Penelope to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. No gentlemen callers in private rooms, no alcohol on the premises. Breakfast at 6, dinner at 6. You're welcome to use the kitchen for lunch, but clean up after yourself. Laundry day is Saturday. Thank you, Mrs. Murphy. This is lovely. The older woman's expression softened. It's not much, but it's clean and safe. The school's just 2 streets over. You can see the bell tower from your window. After Mrs. Murphy left, Penelope sat on the narrow bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back to fall. Everything she had known was gone. Everyone she had loved was gone. And now she was in this strange, violent place where men shot at each other in broad daylight, and everyone seemed to fear this mysterious Zachary Blackwood. She took out her father's pocket watch, running her thumb over the worn silver case. "What have I gotten myself into, Papa?" she whispered. The next morning, Penelope rose early, determined to make a good impression on her first day at the school. She dressed in her best skirt and shirtwaist, pinned her honey blonde hair into a neat bun, and headed downstairs where the smell of coffee and frying bacon greeted her. 3 other boarders sat at the breakfast table: Mr. Phillips, the telegraph operator, Miss Winters, the seamstress, and Dr. Mason, the town physician. They greeted her politely, curiosity evident in their faces. "Heard you had quite an introduction to our town yesterday," Dr. Mason said, passing her a plate of biscuits. He was a man of about 50 with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. "Word travels fast," Penelope replied, taking a biscuit. "In a town this size, gossip is our main form of entertainment," Miss Winters said with a smile. She couldn't have been much older than Penelope, with dark hair and clever eyes. "That, and wondering what Zachary Blackwood is hiding under that duster." "Abigail," Mrs. Murphy scolded as she brought in more coffee. "Well, it's true," the seamstress insisted. "No man wears a coat like that year-round unless he's concealing something." I've offered to make him new shirts a dozen times and he always refuses." "Perhaps he's modest," suggested Mr. Phillips, a thin man with spectacles. "Or perhaps he's covered in prison tattoos," Miss Winters countered, "or scars from knife fights." "Or that's quite enough speculation for breakfast," Mrs. Murphy interrupted firmly. "Miss Hart has her first day of teaching ahead of her, and she doesn't need her head filled with such nonsense." Penelope appreciated the older woman's intervention, but her curiosity had been piqued. What was Zachary Blackwood hiding? And why did everyone in town seem equally fascinated and terrified by him? The Crowsbeak school was a simple one-room building with rows of desks, a small blackboard, and a pot-bellied stove for winter. 27 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age greeted her with a mixture of shyness, curiosity, and in the case of some older boys, defiance. "Good morning," she began, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "My name is Miss Hart, and I'm your new teacher." A freckle-faced boy in the back raised his hand. "Miss Hart, is it true you were in the saloon when Zachary Blackwood shot it up yesterday?" Several children gasped. Penelope took a deep breath. "First, Mr. Blackwood did not shoot up the saloon. He fired a warning shot. Second, that is hardly an appropriate topic for school. Now, let's begin with roll call." The day passed in a blur of lessons, questions, and the thousand small challenges of managing a classroom of children at different ages and skill levels. By the time the final bell rang, Penelope was exhausted but satisfied. Despite the rough start, she felt she had established some authority and even connected with several of the students. As she was locking up the schoolhouse, Sheriff James Porter finally made his appearance, a tall man with a salt and pepper mustache and the weathered look of someone who had seen too much. "Miss Hart," he said, removing his hat. "Apologies for not meeting you yesterday. Had a situation that couldn't wait." "So I heard," Penelope replied, pocketing the school key. "Horse theft at the Morrison place." "That's right. Would have been back in time, but then Blackwood decided to pay a visit to the saloon." The sheriff shook his head. "Between you and me, I'm glad I missed that particular showdown." "Is he really as dangerous as everyone says?" Sheriff Porter considered this. "Blackwood's complicated. Dangerous, yes, but not needlessly cruel. He's got his own code. Problem is, nobody quite knows what that code is until they've broken it." He gestured toward the street. "May I walk you back to Mrs. Murphy's? I'd like to brief you on a few things about the town." As they walked, the sheriff pointed out important locations: the general store, the doctor's office, the church that held services twice a month when the circuit preacher came through. He also filled her in on the social dynamics of Crowsbeak. "The town's divided mostly," he explained. "The merchants and townsfolk on one side, the ranchers on the other. Blackwood's the biggest rancher, but he stays out of town politics. Then there's the mining company trying to buy up land to the west. They've brought in some rough characters." "It sounds complicated," Penelope observed. "Frontier's always complicated, Miss Hart. People come out here for fresh starts, to escape something or to find something. Everyone's got a story they don't tell." The conversation stuck with Penelope over the next few weeks as she settled into life in Crowsbeak. She quickly grew fond of her students, especially young Lucy Weber, who showed a remarkable aptitude for mathematics, and Tommy Sinclair, who struggled with reading but could recite historical facts with impressive accuracy. She also became friends with Abigail Winters, the seamstress, who invited her to tea one Sunday afternoon. "You've adjusted well," Abigail remarked as they sat in her small apartment above her shop. "The children adore you." "They're wonderful," Penelope replied. "Even the difficult ones have their moments." Abigail laughed. "You mean like Jacob Miller? That boy is going to be the death of his poor mother." They chatted about the town, the latest news from back east that had arrived on the stagecoach, and inevitably the subject turned to Zachary Blackwood. "Has he been back to town since that day at the saloon?" Penelope asked, trying to sound casual. "Once, to the general store. He always comes in, buys supplies, and leaves. Never socializes." Abigail leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "But the most interesting thing happened yesterday. His foreman, Paul Davis, came in to order fabric for new curtains at the ranch house. Said Blackwood is fixing the place up." "That seems normal enough," Penelope said, though she too was intrigued. "Except Blackwood has lived there 5 years and never cared about curtains before. And Paul mentioned they're fixing up rooms that have been closed since Blackwood bought the place." Abigail's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Including what used to be the nursery." Penelope nearly choked on her tea. "You think he's expecting a family? I think something's changed. Maybe he's courting someone, though heaven knows who would have him. Or maybe he's expecting visitors." Abigail sighed. "Whatever the reason, I wish he'd let me make him some proper clothes. A man that handsome shouldn't hide under that duster all the time." Penelope found herself thinking about Zachary Blackwood more than she cared to admit. The brief encounter in the saloon had left an impression, those empty eyes, the calm authority, the hint of gentleness when he addressed her. She told herself it was natural curiosity about someone so mysterious, nothing more. October arrived, bringing cooler weather and the harvest festival. The entire town gathered in the town square for games, food, music, and dancing. Penelope was busy overseeing her students' recitations when a hush fell over the crowd. She turned to see what had caused the sudden silence. Zachary Blackwood stood at the edge of the square, still in his black duster, despite the pleasant weather. Beside him was a man she recognized as his foreman, Paul Davis, and 2 other ranch hands. They seemed uncertain, as if they hadn't expected such a reaction to their arrival. Sheriff Porter approached them, hand conspicuously away from his gun. "Blackwood," he said with a nod. "Didn't expect to see you at the festival." "We brought beef for the barbecue," Blackwood replied, gesturing to a wagon behind them loaded with meat. "And the men wanted to join the celebration." The sheriff looked surprised. "That's mighty generous of you." "We're part of this community too, Sheriff." There was no emotion in Blackwood's voice, just a statement of fact. Slowly, the tension eased. The ranch hands moved toward the festivities while several men went to unload the meat. Blackwood remained on the periphery, watching with those storm cloud eyes. Penelope returned to her duties, but she was acutely aware of his presence. Occasionally, she would glance up to find him looking in her direction, only to quickly avert his gaze. As the evening progressed and lanterns were lit around the square, the band began playing dance tunes. Couples took to the cleared area in front of the bandstand. Penelope, having declined several invitations to dance, stood with Mrs. Murphy and Dr. Mason, watching the festivities. "Miss Hart." She turned, startled to find Zachary Blackwood standing before her. Up close, she could see flecks of blue in his gray eyes and the way his dark hair curled slightly where it touched his collar. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, proud that her voice remained steady. "Would you honor me with a dance?" He extended a gloved hand. The request was so unexpected that for a moment Penelope could only stare. Mrs. Murphy made a small noise of surprise beside her. Dr. Mason suddenly became very interested in his punch cup. "Yes, thank you," Penelope finally managed, placing her hand in his. As he led her to the dance floor, she was aware of every eye in Crowsbeak upon them. Blackwood seemed not to notice or care. He placed one hand at her waist, keeping a respectable distance between them, and began to lead her in a waltz with surprising grace. "You dance well, Mr." Blackwood, she said, struggling to reconcile this gentleman with the man who had threatened to shoot someone between the eyes. West Point, he replied. They teach more than military strategy. This new information surprised her. You were in the Army, a shadow crossed his face. A lifetime ago. They danced in silence for a moment before he spoke again. How are you finding Crowsbeak, Miss Hart? It's growing on me, she admitted. The children are wonderful and people have been kind, despite the welcome you received. There was the faintest hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Yes, well, I've learned that first impressions can be misleading. She met his gaze directly. For instance, you're nothing like the devil everyone describes. His expression darkened. Don't be too sure about that, Miss Hart. The dance ended. Blackwood bowed slightly and returned her to Mrs. Murphy's side before disappearing into the crowd. Moments later, Penelope saw him and his men riding out of town. Well, I never, Mrs. Murphy breathed. Zachary Blackwood, dancing in public. And with our new teacher, no less. Dr. Mason added with a curious look at Penelope. She felt her cheeks warm. It was just a dance. But it wasn't just a dance, and Penelope knew it. Something had shifted between them, a connection, however brief, had formed. And judging by the whispers that followed her for the rest of the evening, the entire town had noticed. The next morning, Penelope was awakened by the sound of urgent knocking at her door. She opened it to find Mrs. Murphy still in her nightgown, looking distressed. What is it? What's happened? Fire at the school, the widow said. Sheriff Porter sent word. They've got it under control, but he thought you should know. Penelope dressed hastily and rushed to the school, her heart pounding. By the time she arrived, the fire was out, but the damage was evident. One wall of the schoolhouse was blackened, windows shattered from the heat. Sheriff Porter and several townsmen were examining the building. They turned as she approached. Miss Hart, the sheriff said grimly. I'm afraid this wasn't an accident. What do you mean? He held up a charred kerosene lamp. This was thrown through the window. We found footprints outside. Someone deliberately set the fire. But why? Penelope asked, horrified. Who would want to burn down a school? The sheriff exchanged glances with the other men. We have a theory. Word is that Blackwood took a special interest in you at the festival yesterday. There are those who might view that as problematic. That's absurd, Penelope protested. It was one dance. In some minds, that's enough, Doctor. Mason said, having joined them. Blackwood has enemies, Miss Hart, and now they might think you're under his protection. I'm not under anyone's protection, she insisted. I barely know the man. Sheriff Porter placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Nevertheless, I think it would be wise for you to be careful. The school will need repairs before classes can resume. In the meantime, perhaps you should stay close to town. Repairs to the school would take at least 2 weeks. The town council arranged for lessons to be held temporarily in the church, but Penelope found herself with unexpected free time as the arrangements were made. She used it to visit her students' families, learning more about their lives and circumstances. It was during a visit to the Weber farm, 5 miles outside of town, that she encountered Zachary Blackwood again. She was helping Mrs. Weber hang laundry while little Lucy showed her a collection of interesting rocks when the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Blackwood rode at the head of a small group of men, all of whom reined in their horses when they spotted Penelope. Miss Hart, he said, tipping his hat. Didn't expect to see you out here. I'm visiting my students while the school is being repaired, she replied coolly. Something flashed in his eyes, anger perhaps, or concern. I heard about the fire. Convenient that someone discovered it before the entire building burned down. There was an implication in his words that Penelope didn't understand, but before she could question it, Mrs. Weber invited the men to stop for coffee. We won't impose, Blackwood began, but the farmer's wife insisted. Nonsense. It's the least we can offer after you helped James with that broken fence last month. The men dismounted, though Blackwood remained somewhat apart from the group as coffee was served in the yard. Lucy, unfazed by the newcomer's reputation, approached him with her rock collection. "Mr. Blackwood, do you want to see my rocks? Miss Hart says this one might be a fossil." To Penelope's surprise, Blackwood crouched down to the child's level, examining the rocks with genuine interest. "That does look like a fossil, and this one," he picked up a reddish stone, "is jasper. Good for making arrowheads." Lucy beamed. "Do you know about rocks, Mr. Blackwood?" "A little. My father was interested in geology." It was such an unexpected glimpse into his past that Penelope found herself moving closer, curious to hear more. Blackwood seemed to sense her presence, glancing up with an unreadable expression before returning his attention to Lucy. When the men prepared to leave, Penelope found herself walking alongside Blackwood to his horse. "You're good with children," she observed. "Lucy isn't usually so open with strangers." "Children are better judges of character than adults," he replied. "They haven't learned to fear what they don't understand." There was something in his tone, a bitterness, perhaps, or resignation that made Penelope bold. "Is that why everyone fears you, Mr. Blackwood? Because they don't understand you?" He turned to face her fully, and for a moment she thought she saw something vulnerable in his eyes. "They fear me because I've given them reason to, Miss Hart. As should you." "You haven't given me any reason to fear you," she countered. "Not yet." He mounted his horse, looking down at her with that same empty expression she'd first seen in the saloon. "But if you're smart, you'll keep your distance. The fire at your school wasn't a coincidence." Before she could respond, he nudged his horse forward, rejoining his men. Penelope watched them ride away, more confused than ever about the enigmatic Zachary Blackwood. That evening, back at the boarding house, she recounted the encounter to Abigail, who had come for dinner. "He warned you away from him?" Abigail asked, intrigued. "That's interesting." "What do you mean?" "Well, men who enjoy their fearsome reputations don't usually discourage pretty women from getting close." The seamstress tapped her fork thoughtfully against her plate. "It's almost as if he's protecting you from something." "Or someone," Penelope mused, remembering the sheriff's words about Blackwood's enemies. The following day, Penelope was in the general store purchasing supplies for her temporary classroom when the door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and 3 rough-looking men. The store owner, Mr. Bennett, tensed visibly. "Gentlemen," he said cautiously. "What can I help you with today?" The leader of the group, a tall man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes, smiled unpleasantly. "Just browsing, Bennett, don't mind us." Penelope kept her head down, selecting pencils from a display, but she could feel the men's gazes upon her. "Well, well," the pockmarked man said, approaching her. "You must be the new schoolteacher. Preston's been singing your praises." He extended a hand. "Fletcher Kane. I represent the Western Mining Company." "Miss Hart," she replied, briefly taking his hand. "If you'll excuse me, I need to finish my shopping." Kane blocked her path. "No rush. I've been meaning to introduce myself. We're neighbors in a manner of speaking. Our operation is just west of town." "How nice," Penelope said stiffly, trying to step around him. Kane moved with her. "Word is you've caught Blackwood's eye. That's a dangerous position to be in, Miss Hart." "I don't see how my acquaintances are any of your concern, Mr. Kane." His smile vanished. "Everything in this valley is my concern, especially when it involves Zachary Blackwood. That man is standing in the way of progress, and those who stand with him tend to get hurt." The threat was unmistakable. Penelope straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated. "Are you admitting to burning down my school, Mr. Kane?" Kane's eyes widened briefly before narrowing. That's a serious accusation, Miss Hart. I'd be careful about spreading such ideas. He tipped his hat. Good day to you. I'm sure we'll meet again soon. After the men left, Mr. Bennet hurried to her side. Are you all right, Miss Hart? Fletcher Kane is not someone to cross. So I gathered, she replied, her hands trembling slightly as she counted out coins for her purchases. What does he have against Mr. Blackwood? Bennet lowered his voice. The Western Mining Company wants to divert the river for their operations. That would leave the broken spur without water for cattle. Blackwood has been fighting them in court and other ways. You think Kane set the fire at the school to send a message to Blackwood? I think, Bennet said carefully, that you should be very careful about being caught between two powerful men with a score to settle. The warning echoed in Penelope's mind as she walked back to the boarding house. She had come to Crowsbeak seeking a simple life, a chance to build something new after losing everything. Instead, she found herself entangled in a conflict she barely understood, with mysterious men and dangerous enemies. That night, a fierce storm rolled in from the mountains. Penelope sat by her window, watching lightning split the sky and listening to thunder shake the boarding house to its foundations. The wild weather matched her turbulent thoughts. A sudden knock at the front door downstairs startled her. She heard Mrs. Murphy's heavy tread in the hallway, followed by voices, one of them unmistakably Zachary Blackwood's. Curious, Penelope opened her door a crack, listening. She needs to know, Blackwood was saying, his voice urgent. Kane's men were seen watching the boarding house earlier today. At this hour. Mrs. Murphy protested. Surely it can wait until morning. It can't. Whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass from the kitchen, followed by Mrs. Murphy's scream. Penelope rushed downstairs to find the widow backing away from the kitchen door, where a brick had been thrown through the window. Tied to it was a note. Blackwood picked it up, his expression darkening as he read it. Without a word, he handed it to Penelope. Next time it won't be a brick, she read aloud, her blood running cold. What does this mean? It means Kane is escalating, Blackwood said grimly. And you're in danger, Miss Hart. Mrs. Murphy clutched her chest. Sweet heaven, what are we going to do? She can't stay here, Blackwood stated flatly. It's too exposed. She needs to come to the broken spur. Absolutely not, Penelope exclaimed. I barely know you, Mr. Blackwood. I'm not going to your ranch in the middle of the night. His jaw tightened. Would you prefer to wait for Kane's men to return, perhaps with kerosene instead of a brick? I'll go to the sheriff, she countered. Sheriff Porter is out at the Henderson place. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Blackwood's gaze was intense. Miss Hart, I understand your hesitation, but this isn't a request made lightly. I can protect you at the broken spur. Here you're vulnerable. Mrs. Murphy placed a gentle hand on Penelope's arm. Perhaps he's right, dear, just until the sheriff returns. The older woman looked at Blackwood sternly. And I'll be coming with her, of course. Relief flickered across Blackwood's face. Of course. I would expect nothing less. And so, in the midst of the storm, Penelope found herself in a covered wagon with Mrs. Murphy, headed for the notorious Broken Spur Ranch. Blackwood rode alongside, vigilant, his hand never far from his gun. The main house of the Broken Spur was larger than Penelope had expected, a two-story structure of timber and stone with a wide porch and many windows, most of them glowing with warm light despite the late hour. As they pulled up, several ranch hands emerged, taking the horses and helping the women down from the wagon. Paul Davis, the foreman, greeted them at the door. Rooms are ready, boss. Mrs. Emerson has hot coffee and food waiting. Blackwood nodded. Thank you, Paul. Post extra men tonight, just in case. The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, well furnished with sturdy, practical pieces, and a few unexpected touches of elegance. A large fireplace dominated the main room, its flames casting dancing shadows on polished wood floors partially covered by colorful rugs. Mrs. Emerson, the housekeeper, was a no-nonsense woman of about 60 who efficiently ushered the damp visitors toward the fire. "Let's get you warm and fed," she said, leading them to a table where steaming bowls of stew awaited. As they ate, Blackwood explained the situation more fully. "Kane wants the water rights to the East Fork of the Silver River. It runs through my property, and he needs it for his mining operation." "But surely there are legal ways to resolve such disputes," Penelope said, Blackwood's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. "Kane doesn't care for legal solutions when illegal ones are faster. He's tried bribing officials, threatening ranchers, even sabotaging operations. And now he's targeting Miss Hart because," Mrs. Murphy asked. "Because he thinks she matters to me," Blackwood said bluntly, "and he'll use any leverage he can find." Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That's absurd. We've barely spoken." Blackwood's eyes met hers across the table. "Kane doesn't deal in facts, Miss Hart. He deals in perceptions. And after the Harvest Festival, the perception is that you have my attention." The way he said attention sent an unexpected shiver down Penelope's spine. Before she could respond, Mrs. Emerson returned to show them to their rooms. "You'll be comfortable here," the housekeeper said, leading them upstairs. "These rooms have been recently refurbished." The bedroom assigned to Penelope was indeed lovely, with a 4-poster bed, a small writing desk by the window, and fresh wildflowers in a vase on the dresser. It looked recently decorated, with new curtains that matched the bedspread. "This is beautiful," Penelope remarked, running her hand over the quilt. Mrs. Emerson smiled. "Mr. Blackwood has been improving the house lately. Said it was time the place looked like a proper home again." After the housekeeper left, Penelope stood by the window, looking out at the rain-lashed landscape illuminated by flashes of lightning. Somewhere out there, Fletcher Kane was plotting his next move. And for reasons she couldn't fully comprehend, she had become a pawn in his game against Zachary Blackwood. She was startled from her thoughts by a soft knock. Opening the door, she found Blackwood standing there, his duster gone for once, revealing a dark shirt buttoned to the throat and a leather vest. Even without the duster, he maintained a covered appearance with high collar, long sleeves, and gloves still on his hands. "I wanted to make sure you have everything you need," he said. "Yes, thank you. The room is lovely," he nodded. "I'm glad. He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I want you to know that despite what Kane believes, I never intended to put you in danger, Miss Hart." "I know that," she said softly, "but I still don't understand why you're going to such lengths to protect me." Blackwood was silent for a long moment. "Because no one else will stand against Kane. Because you came to Crowsbeak to build something good, and you deserve the chance to do so." His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw emotion in them, a fierce determination, and something deeper she couldn't name. "And because I find myself unable to stand by while he threatens you." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications neither was prepared to address. Finally, Blackwood stepped back. "Good night, Miss Hart. You're safe here." As he turned to go, Penelope called after him. "Mr. Blackwood," he paused, looking back at her. "Thank you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before he disappeared down the hallway. Penelope slept better than she expected, lulled by the sound of rain on the roof and the knowledge that armed men were protecting the property. She woke to sunshine streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from below. After dressing, she found Mrs. Murphy already at the breakfast table with Mrs. Emerson. Blackwood, she was informed, had ridden out at dawn to check the property boundaries. He rarely sleeps, Mrs. Emerson confided. Been that way since he came here. Sometimes I hear him pacing at all hours. Has he always been so? Solitary? Penelope asked, trying to sound merely curious. The housekeeper considered this. He keeps to himself, but he's fair with the men and generous in his way. Paid for Doc Mason to come out when Hank Willis's boy had the fever last winter. Gave the Prescott family a cow after theirs died. He just doesn't let people get close. Except you, Mrs. Murphy observed. Mrs. Emerson smiled sadly. I'm just the hired help, madam. I cook his meals and keep his house, but he's as much a mystery to me as to anyone. After breakfast, Mrs. Emerson offered to show them around the ranch. The rain had cleared, leaving the landscape freshly washed and gleaming under the autumn sun. The broken spur was impressive, thousands of acres of grassland perfect for cattle, with the Silver River winding through it like a blue ribbon. That's what Kane wants, Mrs. Emerson explained, pointing to the river. If he diverts it for his mining operation, it'll destroy not just the broken spur, but every ranch downstream. As they walked back toward the house, Penelope noticed a small fenced area some distance away. What's that, Mrs. Emerson's expression grew solemn. That's the family cemetery. The Duttons are buried there, the family that owned this place before Mr. Blackwood. He maintains it out of respect, though he never knew them. Penelope found herself drawn to the cemetery. Excusing herself, she walked toward it, curious about this act of respect from a man reputed to be so hard-hearted. The cemetery was small but well-tended, with about a dozen graves marked by simple stone markers. The Dutton family plot was in the center. Jeremiah and Martha Dutton, their 3 children who had died young, and an elderly relative. To the side, somewhat apart, was a newer marker that caught Penelope's attention. Sarah Blackwood, it read. Beloved wife. 1848–1876. Penelope stared at the grave, a dozen questions forming in her mind. Zachary Blackwood had been married, and his wife was buried here on land he'd purchased after her death. The date suggested she had died 2 years ago, around the time he had come to Crowsbeak. She died in the fire. Penelope whirled around to find Blackwood standing behind her, his expression unreadable as always, but with a tension around his eyes that suggested pain carefully controlled. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to intrude. You're not intruding. She would have liked you, I think. He moved to stand beside her, looking down at the grave. She was a teacher, too, back in Virginia. Penelope remained silent, sensing he needed to speak but might stop if interrupted. We were traveling west, looking for a fresh start after the war, he continued. Stopped in a town in Kansas. There was a dispute at a saloon. Men with grudges from the war looking for someone to blame. His voice grew distant. They followed us to our hotel, set it on fire in the night. Horror filled Penelope. How terrible! I tried to save her, couldn't reach her through the flames. His hands clenched at his sides. By the time I fought my way to her, it was too late. Understanding dawned on Penelope. That's why you never take off your duster. You were burned in the fire. Blackwood's gaze snapped to hers, surprise evident in his face. You're perceptive, Miss Hart. Is that why you helped me? Because I remind you of her? He shook his head slowly. No, you're nothing like Sarah. She was quiet, cautious. You're... A faint smile touched his lips. Braver than you should be. The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. Thank you for telling me about her. I haven't spoken of Sarah in a long time, he admitted, but seeing you at her grave, it seemed right somehow. They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Blackwood straightened, his manner becoming more formal again. Sheriff Porter has returned to town. I've sent word about what happened. He'll come out here later today to take statements. Then I should be able to return to town soon, Penelope said, surprised by her reluctance at the thought. If that's what you wish. Blackwood's expression gave nothing away. Though you would be safer here until Kane is dealt with. I can't hide away forever, Mr. Blackwood. I have students waiting, a life to build. He nodded. I understand, but know that you are welcome here, Miss Hart, for as long as you choose to stay. Sheriff Porter arrived in the afternoon, grim-faced as he examined the brick and note that Blackwood had brought from the boarding house. After taking statements from everyone, he sat at the kitchen table with Blackwood, Penelope, and Mrs. Murphy to discuss the situation. Kane's getting bolder, the sheriff said, but proving he's behind this won't be easy. His men are loyal and no one in town will testify against the mining company. Too many rely on them for business. So he gets away with it, Penelope asked incredulously. I didn't say that, Porter replied. I'm gathering evidence, but these things take time. Meanwhile, Miss Hart remains in danger, Blackwood pointed out, the sheriff sighed. I can't post a deputy at the boarding house around the clock, Blackwood. I just don't have the manpower. She could stay here, Blackwood suggested. The broken spur is defensible, and I have men who can ensure her safety. Porter raised an eyebrow. That would certainly send a message to Kane, and probably start a whole new round of gossip in town. I don't care about gossip, Blackwood said dismissively. Well, I do, Penelope interjected. I'm the schoolteacher. I have a reputation to maintain. Mrs. Murphy patted her hand. Dear, I fear that ship has already sailed. The moment you arrived at the harvest festival on Mr. Blackwood's arm, your reputation took a particular turn. We danced once, Penelope protested. Which is one time more than Blackwood has danced with anyone in 5 years, the sheriff noted dryly. People notice these things. Blackwood looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. What matters is Miss Hart's safety, not town gossip. Perhaps, Mrs. Murphy suggested thoughtfully, there's a way to address both concerns. All eyes turned to her, if Miss Hart were to stay here under more formal circumstances, there could be no question of impropriety. The widow smiled. I'm speaking of marriage, of course. Silence fell over the kitchen. Penelope stared at Mrs. Murphy in shock. Sheriff Porter choked on his coffee, and Zachary Blackwood went utterly still, his expression impossible to read. That's absurd, Penelope finally managed. We barely know each other. Marriages of convenience happen all the time on the frontier, Mrs. Murphy pointed out. Mr. Blackwood needs a wife to help manage this big house and provide a civilizing influence. You need protection from Kane. It's a practical solution. I think that's a decision for Miss Hart and Blackwood to discuss privately, Sheriff Porter said, standing up. Meanwhile, I'll head back to town and see what I can find out about Kane's movements. After the sheriff left, an awkward silence descended. Mrs. Murphy, sensing the tension, excused herself to help Mrs. Emerson with the washing, leaving Penelope and Blackwood alone in the kitchen. I apologize for Mrs. Murphy's suggestion, Penelope said stiffly. It was inappropriate. Blackwood studied her for a long moment. Was it? It would solve several problems at once. Penelope's eyes widened. You can't be serious. I am always serious, Miss Hart. He leaned forward slightly. I own the largest ranch in the territory. As my wife, you would have security, protection, and the means to build the school you want for your students. And what would you get from this arrangement? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His eyes held hers. An ally against Kane. Someone to make this house a home again. And perhaps, in time, something more. The implication sent heat coursing through her. This was madness, considering marriage to a man she hardly knew, a man feared by everyone in town, a man who kept himself hidden both physically and emotionally. You don't know me, she protested weakly. I know enough, he countered. I know you're brave, intelligent, and kind. I know you care for your students beyond duty. I know you see people for who they are, not what others say about them. Penelope stood, needing distance to think clearly. This is too sudden. I need time. Blackwood nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. He rose as well. But Kane won't wait, Miss Hart. And neither will the gossips in town once word spreads that you spent nights at the Broken Spur, regardless of the circumstances. The truth of his words hit her. Her reputation, so crucial for a teacher in a small town, was already compromised. If she returned to Crowsbeak now, the whispers would follow her everywhere. Some parents might even withdraw their children from her class. And then there was Kane. His threats were real, and staying at the boarding house put not only herself but also Mrs. Murphy and the other boarders at risk. Blackwood seemed to read her thoughts. I'm not asking for a traditional marriage, Miss Hart. You would have your own room, your own life. I would expect nothing from you except your presence in this house and the occasional appearance in town as my wife. And if I want more than that, the question escaped before she could stop it. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or hope quickly suppressed. Then we would discuss it. When you're ready. Penelope took a deep breath. I need to speak with Mrs. Murphy. Of course. She found the widow in the laundry room, helping Mrs. Emerson fold sheets. When Penelope explained Blackwood's proposal, both women exchanged knowing glances. I thought he might suggest it, Mrs. Murphy said. He's a practical man, and it is a practical solution. But marriage, Penelope exclaimed. To a man I barely know, a man who never even shows his face in town unless absolutely necessary. Mrs. Emerson hung the last sheet on the line. Mr. Blackwood is a good man, Miss Hart. Wounded, yes. Careful about who he trusts, certainly. But good where it counts. And he clearly cares for you, Mrs. Murphy added. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Penelope sat on a nearby stool, her thoughts in turmoil. I came to Crowsbeak for independence, to build something of my own, not to become someone's wife. Who says you can't do both? Mrs. Emerson asked practically. The Broken Spur is closer to town than many of your students live. You could still teach, and with Mr. Blackwood's resources, you could build a better school than the town council ever dreamed of. As for independence, Mrs. Murphy said gently, sometimes true independence comes from making choices that others might not understand, but that you know are right for you. By evening, Penelope had made her decision. She found Blackwood in his study, reviewing ledgers by lamplight. He stood when she entered, his expression cautiously hopeful. I will marry you, she said without preamble, but I have conditions. I expected nothing less, he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. Name them. I continue teaching. The ranch hands children and any others who wish to attend classes here until the school in town is rebuilt. After that, I return to teaching there. Blackwood nodded. Agreed. I want to understand what I'm getting into with Kane and the water rights dispute. No more keeping me in the dark for my protection. That's fair, he conceded. Penelope took a deep breath. And I want to see what you're hiding under your shirt. Blackwood went rigid. Miss Hart, if I'm to be your wife, even in name only, I should know what you're concealing. Not just the physical scars, but the story behind them. She met his gaze steadily. I won't be afraid, Mr. Blackwood. Whatever you're hiding, it can't be worse than what I've imagined. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached up to unbutton his vest. Not here, he said quietly. Come with me. He led her upstairs to what she assumed was his bedroom, a large, sparsely furnished room with a massive four-poster bed and simple furnishings. A single lamp burned on the bedside table, casting long shadows across the floor. Blackwood stood in the center of the room, his back to her. Close the door. Penelope did so, her heart pounding. She watched as he removed his vest, laying it carefully on a chair. Then he began unbuttoning his shirt, his movements deliberate, as if performing a ritual he both dreaded and accepted as necessary. When the last button was undone, he paused, his hands gripping the fabric. "I haven't shown anyone since the doctors in Kansas," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not even Mrs. Emerson has seen." "You don't have to," Penelope began, suddenly uncertain of her demand. "Yes, I do." He turned to face her, his shirt still closed. "If we're to have any kind of life together, you need to know what you're agreeing to." With that, he let the shirt fall open, then slip from his shoulders entirely. Penelope gasped. The lamplight revealed what Blackwood had been hiding all these years, a network of angry red scars that covered his chest, shoulders, and extended down his right arm. The burn marks created a twisted landscape across his skin, puckered and discolored, telling the story of his desperate attempt to save his wife from the flames. "Now you know," he said, his voice flat. "Why I never remove my shirt, why I keep to myself." Penelope moved toward him, her eyes never leaving his face. "You think these scars make you a monster, something to be feared or pitied, don't they?" he asked, a rare vulnerability in his expression. She shook her head. "They make you a survivor, Mr. Blackwood. A man who walked through fire to save someone he loved." She reached out, her hand hovering near his chest, not quite touching. "May I?" After a slight hesitation, he nodded. Gently, she placed her palm against his scarred skin, feeling the uneven texture and the steady beat of his heart beneath. "These are badges of courage, not marks of shame." Something broke in Zachary Blackwood, then a wall he had maintained for years crumbling under the simple acceptance in Penelope's touch. He closed his eyes, a shudder running through him. When he opened them again, they were no longer empty. They held pain, yes, but also a warmth she had glimpsed only in rare moments before. "Penelope," he said the first time he had used her given name, "are you certain about this marriage? There would be no going back." She smiled softly. "I'm certain that I want to help you fight Cain. I'm certain that I want to know the man behind the reputation. The rest, we can discover together." The wedding took place 3 days later in the parlor of the Broken Spur. Judge Wilson came from the county seat to perform the ceremony with Sheriff Porter, Mrs. Murphy, Mrs. Emerson, and Paul Davis as witnesses. Penelope wore a simple blue dress that Abigail had altered hastily when she heard the news, and Blackwood wore his customary black, though he had a new shirt and vest for the occasion. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. When Judge Wilson pronounced them man and wife, Blackwood lifted Penelope's hand to his lips in a gesture both respectful and oddly intimate. No further displays of affection were exchanged, though Penelope found herself wondering what it would be like to kiss the solemn man who was now her husband. News of the marriage spread through Crowsbeak like wildfire. Most were shocked, some disapproving, but none could deny the practical advantages for both parties. The schoolteacher gained protection and security, the reclusive rancher gained respectability, and an ally in town. Fletcher Kane, when he heard the news, was reportedly furious. "This changes nothing," he told his men, according to Sheriff Porter's informant. "Blackwood's water rights will be mine, with or without his new bride." Life at the Broken Spur settled into an unexpected rhythm. True to her word, Penelope began teaching the ranch hands children and several students from outlying farms in the large dining room, which Blackwood had cleared for that purpose. In the evenings, she would join her husband for dinner, where they discussed the day's events, books they had read, or sometimes just sat in companionable silence. They maintained separate bedrooms, as agreed, though Penelope occasionally caught Blackwood looking at her with an expression that suggested he might wish for more. For her part, she found herself increasingly drawn to the complex man behind the fearsome reputation, his unexpected gentleness with children, his dry wit, his unfailing fairness with the ranch hands. One evening, about 2 weeks after the wedding, Penelope was reading in the parlor when Blackwood entered, a worried expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked, setting aside her book. "Kane's men were seen at the north boundary today," he said. "They were measuring the river flow." Penelope frowned. "Is that legal?" "Not on my property, it isn't." Blackwood paced the room. "He's getting impatient. The mining company's investors want results, and he's promised them water access by spring. What can we do?" He paused, looking at her with appreciation for the "we" in her question. "I've filed injunctions, hired lawyers, but Kane doesn't play by the rules. I fear he's planning something drastic." As if his words had summoned trouble, a ranch hand burst through the door. "Fire, boss." "The north pasture is burning." Blackwood was moving instantly, shouting orders as he grabbed his hat and gun belt. "Get all the men, bring water wagons, and send someone to alert the neighboring ranches." Penelope followed him to the door. "Let me help." "Stay here," he ordered. If this is Kane's doing, his men might be watching for an opportunity to strike elsewhere while we're distracted. Before she could protest, he was gone, riding hard toward the orange glow already visible on the horizon. Hours passed with no word. Penelope paced the house, too anxious to sit still. Mrs. Emerson prepared coffee and sandwiches for the men who would return exhausted if they returned at all. "They'll be all right," the housekeeper assured her. "Mr. Blackwood knows how to handle fire." The words, meant to comfort, only reminded Penelope of the scars her husband carried, physical reminders of another fire, another desperate fight. It was past midnight when the men finally returned, soot-covered and weary. Blackwood was the last to enter, his face grim beneath the layer of ash that darkened it. "How bad?" Penelope asked, handing him coffee. "We contained it before it reached the river or any structures," he said, his voice hoarse from smoke. "Lost about 50 acres of grazing land and some fencing." "Was it Kane?" Blackwood's expression hardened. "One of his men was caught watching from the ridge, said he was just passing by. Convenient timing." After the men had eaten and dispersed to their bunks, Penelope followed Blackwood upstairs. At the door to his room, he paused. "You should rest," she said gently. "You've had a long night." He turned to her, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. "Every time I close my eyes after a fire, I see her, Sarah, trapped in the flames, reaching for me." Without thinking, Penelope took his hand. "You don't have to be alone with those memories tonight." He searched her face, uncertain. "Penelope, we agreed. I'm not suggesting we change our arrangement," she clarified. "Just that perhaps tonight you might sleep better with someone nearby, to chase away the nightmares." Something like gratitude flickered in his eyes. He squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you." That night, Penelope sat in a chair by Blackwood's bed, reading quietly as he fell into an exhausted sleep. When nightmares came, as she had expected they would, she was there to wake him with a gentle touch and soothing words. By morning, they had crossed some invisible boundary in their relationship, not as lovers, but as true partners who had seen each other's vulnerabilities and stood guard over each other's fears. Over the following weeks, their marriage deepened in unexpected ways. Blackwood began joining Penelope's classes occasionally, teaching the children about tracking local plants and the history of the territory. She, in turn, helped him with correspondence and accounts, bringing order to the business side of the ranch. In town, attitudes toward the unlikely couple gradually shifted. When they attended church together for the first time, initial whispers gave way to cautious acceptance, as people observed the obvious respect between them. Even those who had feared Blackwood for years began to see him differently through his interactions with his new wife. Cain, however, continued his campaign against the broken spur. Minor incidents of sabotage occurred regularly: cut fences, scattered cattle, contaminated water troughs. Each time, Blackwood and his men repaired the damage and increased security, but the constant vigilance took its toll. "He's trying to wear us down," Blackwood told Penelope one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. "Make managing the ranch so difficult that selling becomes the easier option." "It won't work," she said firmly. "We're stronger than he thinks." Blackwood looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You've become quite the rancher's wife in a short time. Is that a complaint?" "Far from it." He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. "It's just not what I expected when I proposed our arrangement." Penelope returned his smile. "What did you expect? A business partner, perhaps? Someone to present a united front against Cain?" He reached for her hand, a gesture that had become more frequent between them. "I didn't expect to find a friend, someone who makes this house feel like home again." "Is that all I am, a friend?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. Blackwood's eyes darkened. "You know you're more than that, Penelope, but I won't press for what you're not ready to give." "And if I am ready?" she asked softly. He studied her face, searching for certainty. "Are you?" Instead of answering with words, Penelope leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as Blackwood responded, his hand coming up to cup her face with exquisite tenderness. When they broke apart, his eyes held a warmth she had never seen before. "I've wanted to do that since the Harvest Festival," he admitted. Penelope laughed softly. "And I've wanted you to do it since you walked me home that night." Their newfound intimacy brought changes to their relationship. Though they still maintained separate bedrooms, Blackwood insisting that Penelope should feel no pressure to change that arrangement until she was completely certain. They spent evenings together, talking long into the night, sharing stories of their pasts, dreams for the future, and increasingly frequent kisses that left them both breathless. One morning in early December, Penelope woke to the sound of horses in the yard. Looking out her window, she saw Sheriff Porter dismounting, his expression grim as he spoke with one of the ranch hands. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs to find Blackwood already in conversation with the sheriff in the study. "Can't ignore this, Blackwood," Porter was saying. "The whole town's talking about it." "What's happened?" Penelope asked, entering the room. Both men turned to her, Blackwood's face uncharacteristically troubled. "Cain's filed formal charges against me," he explained. "Claims I've been stealing water from mining company property." "That's ridiculous," she exclaimed. "The river runs through your land." "The dispute is over the boundary line," Sheriff Porter explained. "Cain's produced a survey that shows the northern fork of the river is actually on mining company land, not the broken spur." "It's a forgery," Blackwood said flatly. "I have the original survey from when I purchased the property." "The boundary is clear," Porter sighed. "Cain's got the county commissioner in his pocket, Blackwood, and the judge who'll hear the case owes the mining company for financing his election campaign." "So what you're saying is that the law won't help us," Penelope concluded. "I'm saying proceed carefully," the sheriff advised. "Cain's playing a dangerous game, and he's not above using underhanded tactics." After Porter left, Blackwood paced the study, frustration evident in every movement. "He's backed me into a corner. If the court rules in Cain's favor, he gets the water rights. If I take action outside the law, I become the criminal he's painting me as." "There must be another way," Penelope insisted. "Something we haven't considered." Blackwood stopped pacing, his expression suddenly alert. Perhaps there is. Kane's investors, they're Eastern businessmen who care about reputation and public opinion. If they knew what kind of man they were backing. We could write to them, Penelope suggested. Gather testimonies from other ranchers Kane has harassed. Better yet, Blackwood said, his eyes lighting with purpose, we could bring them here. Show them exactly what's at stake. The plan took shape quickly. Through connections in Denver, Blackwood arranged for representatives of the mining company's major investors to visit Crowsbeak, ostensibly to review the progress of the operation. Meanwhile, Penelope gathered statements from neighboring ranchers and townspeople who had witnessed Kane's tactics firsthand. Kane, predictably, was furious when he learned of the impending visit. You think Eastern money men will take your word over mine? He sneered when he encountered Blackwood in town. They don't care about water rights or cattle, they care about profit. Then they should know exactly how you plan to deliver that profit, Blackwood replied evenly. Through intimidation, forgery, and arson. Kane's face darkened. You'll regret this, Blackwood. You and that pretty wife of yours. The threat hung in the air between them, but Blackwood remained calm. Touch her, and there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in. Word of the confrontation spread quickly. By the time Blackwood returned to the ranch, Penelope had already heard 3 different versions of the exchange. People are saying you threatened to kill him, she said as they sat down to dinner. People exaggerate, he replied, though his eyes held a dangerous glint. I merely stated facts. Penelope reached across the table to take his hand. Zachary, promise me you won't do anything rash. We have a chance to solve this legally through the investors. He squeezed her hand. I promise to try the legal route first. But if he threatens you again, he's trying to provoke you, she pointed out. Don't give him what he wants. The day the investors arrived, Crowsbeak put on its best face. The town council organized a welcome dinner at the hotel, inviting prominent citizens including Blackwood and Penelope. It was the first formal event they had attended as a couple, and Penelope wore a new green dress that Abigail had made especially for the occasion. You look beautiful, Blackwood said as he helped her into the buggy, his eyes appreciative. And you look very handsome, she replied truthfully. He had dressed with care in a new black suit, his usual high collar and long sleeves maintaining his privacy while still appearing formal. The dinner was a tense affair. Kane and his associates sat at one end of the table with the investors' 3 serious-looking men from New York and Boston. Blackwood and Penelope sat with Sheriff Porter, Mayor Collins, and several ranchers at the other end. As the meal progressed, conversation inevitably turned to the mining operation and its needs. Water access is our primary concern, explained Mr. Harrington, the lead investor. Mr. Kane assures us that the legal issues will be resolved shortly. Legal issues have a way of becoming complicated when one party falsifies documents, Blackwood said mildly. Kane's face flushed. That's a serious accusation, Blackwood. It is, Blackwood agreed. One I'm prepared to substantiate. Before Kane could respond, Penelope spoke up. Gentlemen, perhaps you would consider visiting the Broken Spur tomorrow. See for yourselves the river in question and how crucial it is to the ranching operations in the valley. Mr. Harrington looked intrigued. That seems reasonable, Mr. Kane has shown us the mining operation. It would be educational to see the other perspective. Kane could hardly object without appearing obstructionist. Of course, he said through gritted teeth. Though I'm not sure what Mrs. Blackwood hopes to accomplish. Understanding, Penelope replied simply. Something in short supply lately. The following day, the investors arrived at the Broken Spur, clearly impressed by the scale and efficiency of the operation. Blackwood led them on a tour, explaining the ranch's dependence on the river for cattle, crops, and household use. He showed them the original survey documents, pointing out discrepancies with Kane's version. If the river is diverted as planned, he explained, not only would the broken spur suffer but also every ranch and farm downstream. The environmental impact would be devastating. Mr. Harrington, a shrewd businessman but not without conscience, looked troubled. Mr. Kane indicated that the diversion would have minimal impact on local agriculture. He lied, Blackwood said bluntly, as he's lied about many things. At that moment, Paul Davis approached with several ranch hands. "Boss, you need to see this." They followed him to the north pasture, where Kane and a group of his men were erecting markers along what they claimed was the true property line well inside Broken Spur territory. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Blackwood demanded, dismounting. Kane smiled unpleasantly. "Just marking the boundary according to the legal survey, Blackwood. These gentlemen should see exactly where mining company land begins." "This is blatant trespassing, and you know it," Blackwood said, his voice dangerously calm. The investors looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Kane, perhaps this is not the appropriate time," Mr. Harrington began. "It's exactly the appropriate time," Kane interrupted. "Blackwood's been squatting on company land for years. It ends now." One of Kane's men moved toward the river with what appeared to be surveying equipment. Several Broken Spur hands intercepted him, tensions rising visibly. "Stop this," Penelope urged, moving between the groups. "There are legal channels for resolving boundary disputes." Kane's expression turned ugly. "Stay out of this, Mrs. Blackwood. Unless you want to join your husband when we run him off this land." "That's enough," Mr. Harrington said sharply. "Mr. Kane, you assured us this was a straightforward water rights issue. You said nothing about disputed boundaries or forcing people from their homes." "Business sometimes requires decisive action," Kane replied dismissively. "Not our business," said another investor, Mr. Whitaker. "Western Mining Company doesn't operate through intimidation. If this is how you've been handling local relations, it's no wonder we've faced resistance." The conversation might have continued, but a shout from one of the ranch hands interrupted them. "Fire! The south barn!" Everyone turned to see smoke rising from the direction of the ranch buildings. In the confusion, no one noticed one of Kane's men slipping something into his pocket, a matchbox and flint. No one except Penelope. "It was them," she said, grabbing Blackwood's arm as he prepared to ride toward the fire. "I saw one of Kane's men with matches." Blackwood's eyes darted to the man in question, then back to Kane, whose smirk confirmed Penelope's accusation. "You set fire to my property." Blackwood's voice was deadly quiet. "With my wife and guests present." The investors looked horrified. "Mr. Kane, explain yourself," demanded Mr. Harrington. Kane shrugged. "Accidents happen. Old barns are fire hazards." It was the wrong thing to say. Blackwood moved with lightning speed, grabbing Kane by the collar and nearly lifting him off the ground. "You're playing with fire in more ways than one," he growled. "And you have no idea what you're dealing with." "Zachary," Penelope said urgently. "The barn." With visible effort, Blackwood released Kane and turned his attention to the fire. "Paul, take 10 men and deal with the barn. The rest of you escort our guests back to the house safely." As they rode back, the investors were uncharacteristically silent, clearly processing what they had witnessed. At the house, while Blackwood went to oversee the firefighting efforts, Penelope served coffee and explained the history of Kane's intimidation tactics. "We have documentation of every incident," she said, showing them a carefully maintained ledger. "Cut fences, scattered cattle, threatened ranch hands, the fire in the north pasture last month, and now this." Mr. Harrington shook his head in disgust. "This is not how Western Mining conducts business, Mrs. Blackwood. We invest in legitimate operations, not thuggery. Then perhaps you should reconsider your local management, she suggested. The investors exchanged glances. Indeed, Mr. Whittaker agreed. I believe we have seen enough to make some decisions. By the time Blackwood returned, soot-streaked but relieved that the fire had been contained with minimal damage, the investors had reached a conclusion. Mr. Blackwood, Mr. Harrington said formally, on behalf of Western Mining's investment group, I wish to extend our sincere apologies for today's events. Mr. Kane's methods are not sanctioned by our company and he will be replaced immediately. Blackwood looked stunned. Replaced? We've sent for the company's vice president in Denver. He'll arrive next week to assess the situation and determine appropriate water usage that doesn't infringe on ranching operations. Mr. Harrington glanced at Penelope with respect. Your wife has been most persuasive about the need for coexistence rather than conflict. After the investors left, promising to handle Kane themselves, Blackwood turned to Penelope with wonder in his eyes. How did you manage that? She smiled. I simply showed them the facts. And perhaps appealed to their better natures. You're remarkable, he said, drawing her into his arms. I thought this would end in bloodshed, and instead you found a peaceful solution. Not entirely peaceful, she reminded him, touching a smudge of soot on his cheek. We still lost a barn. A small price to pay for what we've gained. He kissed her then, with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. That night, for the first time, Penelope went to Zachary's room not as a comforter of nightmares but as a wife in every sense. He received her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, his hands gentle despite the scars that marked them. When he hesitated to remove his shirt, she did it for him, pressing kisses to each mark of his courage until he no longer flinched from her touch. Their lovemaking was a revelation passionate yet tender, a physical expression of the trust and love that had grown between them over the months of their unusual marriage. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Zachary confessed what Penelope had already come to know. I love you, he whispered against her hair. I think I have since that first day in the saloon when you looked at me without fear. I love you too, she replied, her hand resting over his heart. Not despite your scars, but including them. They're part of what made you the man I love. The next morning, word arrived that Fletcher Kane had been removed from his position and was being escorted to Denver to answer questions about his management practices. The new interim manager, a reasonable man named Harrison, immediately reached out to Blackwood to begin discussions about equitable water usage. By spring, a formal agreement had been reached that allowed both the mine and the ranches to access the water they needed without harming the river's ecosystem. The school in town was rebuilt, larger and better equipped thanks to a generous donation from the Blackwoods. Penelope resumed teaching there 3 days a week, while continuing classes at the ranch for children who lived too far from town. As for Zachary, the events of that winter brought unexpected changes. Though he still wore long sleeves and high collars in public, he grew more comfortable showing his scars at home. He began appearing in town more frequently, usually with Penelope, gradually becoming a respected figure rather than a feared one. The first anniversary of their marriage was celebrated with a small gathering at the Broken Spur friends from town, neighboring ranchers, and the ranch hands who had become like family. As Zachary watched his wife laughing with Abigail Winters, he reflected on how completely his life had transformed in just 1 year, from isolation to connection, from emptiness to purpose, from mere existence to a life rich with meaning and love. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Penelope shared news that would change their lives once more. Zachary, she said, taking his hand and placing it on her stomach. There's someone I think you should meet, though we'll have to wait about 7 months for a proper introduction." His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You're certain?" she nodded, smiling at the joy spreading across his face. "Dr. Mason confirmed it yesterday. We're having a baby." Zachary pulled her close, overwhelmed by emotion. "I never thought I would have this again, a family, a future." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You've given me back everything I thought was lost forever." "We've given it to each other," she corrected gently. "And now we'll give this child a home filled with love." In September 1880, Sarah Elizabeth Blackwood was born at the Broken Spur, a healthy, strong, lunged daughter with her mother's honey blonde hair and her father's storm gray eyes. Zachary held her with hands that no longer trembled, marveling at the perfect new life they had created. As Penelope watched her husband with their daughter, she thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that first frightening encounter in the saloon to this moment of pure joy. They had faced danger, overcome prejudice, and healed wounds both visible and hidden. The cowboy nobody dared to touch had become the man she couldn't imagine living without. And the scars he had hidden for so long had become symbols not of loss but of survival, reminders that even through fire, love could endure. In the years that followed, the Broken Spur flourished. 2 more children joined the family, James in 1882 and Rebecca in 1884. The school Penelope established at the ranch became known throughout the territory for its excellence. And Zachary, once feared and avoided, became a respected community leader, using his influence to help other veterans rebuilding their lives after the war. On warm summer evenings, the family often sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant colors. And sometimes, when the children were asleep, Zachary and Penelope would dance slowly in the parlor, no music needed beyond the rhythm of their hearts beating in tandem. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked once, holding her close. "Marrying a man you barely knew?" Penelope smiled, touching the scar that ran from his temple to his mouth, a mark she had come to love as much as the man who bore it. "I didn't marry a stranger," she said softly. "I married a hero hiding behind a fearsome reputation, and I've never regretted it for a moment." "Not even when you discovered what was under my shirt?" he teased, more comfortable now with references to his scars. "Especially not then," she assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "That's when I knew for certain I had married a man of extraordinary courage, the courage to walk through fire, to begin again, and to open his heart when he thought it was forever closed." Under the vast Arizona sky, the Broken Spur stood as a testament to that courage and to the healing power of love that sees beyond scars to the heart beneath.